Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to break down the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It just passed Congress. And when we say big, it's almost an understatement.
Absolutely. It's monumental. It's far more than just a budget.
Exactly. It's really this huge blueprint that, well, it touches almost everything in American life, from, your household budget right up to military space programs. So our goal today is really to cut through all that complexity. We want to pull out the most important pieces for you, help you get a quick handle on what this law actually means for everyone, individuals, communities, businesses.
It's a huge task, but yeah, distilling it down is key.
Okay, let's unpack it. Let's start with how this act impacts people directly, individuals, families, and the social programs they rely on, maybe starting with food assistance.
Right. So looking at SNAP, that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what many people still call food stamps, there's a really significant change around the Thrifty Food Plan.
Okay, and that's the basis for calculating benefits, right?
Exactly. And the Act specifically says its cost won't be increased. And maybe even more importantly, any future updates after October 1st, 2027, they have to be cost neutral.
Cost neutral. What does that actually mean in practice for a family using SNB?
Well, it means the plan might change, to reflect maybe new dietary guidelines or something, but the total cost can't go up. So the benefit level is essentially capped.
Which implies that over time.
Over time, yeah, the purchasing power is likely to go down. As food prices rise, which they tend to do, the same benefit amount just won't stretch as far. It could mean less food for families down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And they've also fixed the household adjustments. Like a one-person household gets 30% of the max allotment, a four-person gets 100%, only Hawaii and Alaska get special cost adjustments.
Okay. And beyond the money side, I understand the work requirements for SNRP are changing too. They're getting stricter.
Yes, significantly stricter for able-bodied adults without dependents, or ABAWDs, now covering ages 18 up to 65.
So what are the details there? And who's going to feel this most?
Well, the idea behind it is to push more people into the workforce. But there are exemptions. If you're under 18, over 65, medically unfit, or you're a parent caring for a young child, specifically under 14, you're exempt.
Okay.
But the big change is that states used to have waivers, some flexibility. Those state exemptions are set to expire by the end of 2028.
So that safety net or flexibility is going away.
Right, which could mean a lot more people become subject to these rules, people who might face real hurdles like lack of childcare, transportation issues, maybe chronic health problems that don't quite meet the medically unfit definition. It can make it harder for them to keep their benefits.
And there's something about state admin costs, too.
Yeah, changes to the federal share. Basically, if a state has a high payment error rate, say 10% or more, their federal funding share for running the program could drop down to maybe 85%.
So pressure on the states to be very strict.
Exactly.
Right.
It incentivizes tight management, maybe even being overly cautious, and puts more financial burden on the states.
Okay, let's shift gears from food to healthcare. The act puts in place some really long moratoriums, right? Until, 2034?
That's right, September 30th, 2034. It's a freeze on implementing certain new eligibility and enrollment rules for programs like Medicare savings programs, Medicaid, CHP, the basic health program.
And also staffing standards in long-term care.
Yes, also a moratorium on federal staffing standards for nursing homes under Medicare and Medicaid.
Wow, over a decade. What's the likely effect of freezing things for that long?
Well, on one hand, it could provide some stability. Providers and states won't have to adapt to new federal rules constantly, but it also means potential improvements. Things that might be needed to update eligibility or improve care, especially in long-term care staffing, could be stalled for a very long time. Current standards, good or bad, might just be locked in.
And fraud prevention, that seems to be a focus across these programs.
Definitely. By October 2029, states have new mandates. They have to get regular address updates for Medicaid recipients. They need to cross-check for people enrolled in multiple states and use things like the Social Security Death Master File to verify if beneficiaries or even providers are deceased.
Trying to cut down on improper payments?
Exactly. And there are teeth to it. Starting in fiscal year 2030, states could see their federal payments reduced if they have high rates of these erroneous excess payments. So the big push for program integrity.
There are also changes to who qualifies for Medicaid, specifically around home equity and for non-citizens.
Yes. The Act changes the rules on how much home equity someone can have and still qualify for Medicaid-funded long-term care. It could mean the value of your home impacts your eligibility faster than before.
And for non-citizens?
It tightens things considerably. Starting October 1st, 2026, Medicaid eligibility for non-citizens, the Act uses the term aliens, will be strictly limited to U.S. citizens, nationals, or only certain categories of lawfully admitted immigrants.
So potentially narrowing access for some immigrant groups.
That's the likely outcome, yes.
And then there's this new concept, community engagement requirements for Medicaid. What on earth is that?
It's a significant policy shift. By January 2027, states will have to set up requirements for some Medicaid recipients to be involved in community engagement, things like working, job training, volunteering, maybe going to school.
Linking health benefits to work or other activities?
Pretty much. But there are quite a few exemptions. It doesn't apply to people under 19 or over 60, people with disabilities, pregnant individuals, or veterans, for example.
Okay.
And another thing, states will get the option, starting October 2028, to charge cost sharing, like copays, for some services to Medicaid recipients whose family incomes are above the federal poverty line. That could mean new out-of-pocket costs for some people on Medicaid.
And one last point on healthcare, a specific funding prohibition.
Yes,
right.
A very direct one. The Act prohibits federal funds from going to what it calls prohibited entities. These are defined specifically as 501c3 nonprofit organizations that also provide abortion services.
So a clear move to restrict federal funding based on that specific activity.
Unmistakably.
Okay, let's move on. Education and student loans, always a huge topic. This act seems to bring some major shifts, starting with loan limits.
Yeah, big changes here. For grad students and professional students, there's now a lifetime borrowing cap of $200,000 in federal loans. For parents taking out PLUS loans for the kids, it's $20,000 per year with a $100,000 total cap.
But isn't there something even more fundamental changing with graduate loans?
Oh, absolutely. This is huge. Federal direct PLUS loans specifically for graduate and professional students are being terminated completely, starting July 1st, 2026.
Terminated. Wow. That's not just tweaking, that's removing a major financing route.
It really is. It could fundamentally change how graduate education is paid for. It might restrict access, especially for students without other resources, maybe pushing them towards private loans with higher interest rates, or making them rethink grad school altogether.
A big shift away from federal backing for advanced degrees.
A very noticeable one. Now, on the flip side, for loans made after that date, they are setting up new income-based repayment plan options, including something called a repayment assistance plan. So maybe more flexibility on the back end for those who do borrow.
Okay. And Pell Grants. I saw there's more funding, but also this new workforce Pell Grant.
Yes, a big infusion of cash for the regular Pell Grant program, about $12.67 billion to cover shortfalls. But you're right, this workforce Pell Grant idea is new.
How's it different?
It's specifically targeted. It's for shorter-term workforce training programs, think vocational skills, trades, certificates, not for graduate degrees. It clearly signals a federal push towards funding programs directly tied to specific job skills.
And there are new rules about program outcomes, too. Something about low-earning outcome programs.
Right. This is interesting. Programs where the typical graduate earns less than 150% of the median earnings for a working adult in that state or the U.S. overall could lose their eligibility for federal student aid, including these Pell Grants.
So trying to tie federal funding to programs that lead to better-paying jobs.
That's the stated goal, yes. Ensuring a return on investment for both the student and the taxpayer.
Okay, so stepping back from this first big section.
Sure.
What's the main takeaway? It really feels like a fundamental reshaping of how people access basic support, food, healthcare, education.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
There's a definite theme of recalibrating federal support. You see more emphasis on work requirements, on program integrity checks, and a more targeted approach to where aid goes, like with the workforce Pell Grants.
And the impact will vary a lot depending on who you are.
Absolutely. Someone relying on SNAP, a grad student, someone needing long-term care on Medicaid, they'll all feel these changes differently. And states have a lot of administrative work ahead of them, too.
All right. Okay, let's transition now to the economy, economic shifts, business regulations, starting with taxes on individuals. The Act changes some existing tax credits.
It does. For the child tax credit and also the American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning Education credits, you'll now need a Social Security number to claim them.
And the impact of that.
It tightens eligibility. The aim is likely fraud reduction, but it could mean some families, perhaps those using an ITN, an individual taxpayer identification number, might no longer qualify for credits they received before. Some credit amounts are also getting inflation adjustments, which is generally helpful.
And some new deductions are being introduced, though they sound temporary.
That's right, a couple of temporary ones. There's a qualified tips deduction, up to $25,000, but it phases out at higher incomes and it ends after 2028.
Okay.
And similarly, a qualified overtime compensation deduction, up to $10,000, also phases out, also ends end of 2028. They seem like short-term boosts, maybe for specific industries.
And one for car loans.
Yeah, a passive vehicle loan interest deduction up to $2,000.
Yeah.
It also phases out for higher earners, and you need the car's VIN, the vehicle identification number, to claim it.
VIN verification, okay. Trying to prevent fraud there, too.
Seemed likely, yeah. Tying the deduction clearly to a specific vehicle.
Now, this is interesting. The creation of something called Trump accounts. What are these?
Yeah, the name certainly stands out. These are basically new savings accounts for kids, anyone under 18.
Like a 529 or something?
Sort of, but different. The annual contribution limit is $5,000 from parents or family, not employers directly. And the money has to be invested in specific index funds.
And the benefit?
It grows tax-free, and withdrawals after age 18 are tax-free. So kind of like a Roth IRA structure, but for minors. Plus, employers can contribute up to $2,500 a year, and that amount isn't counted as income for the employee. And there's even a $1,000 refundable tax credit for families who set one up for an eligible child.
Wow, that sounds like a potentially powerful savings tool for families who can afford to contribute.
It really does. It could definitely influence how families save for their kids' futures, maybe shifting wealth transfer approaches.
And what about other deductions people are used to taking? Itemized deductions.
Big changes there, too. Most miscellaneous itemized deductions are gone. The exception is the deduction for educator expenses.
So simplifying things, but maybe reducing deductions for some.
Exactly. And there are also new limits or modifications on deducting mortgage interest, qualified residence interest, and casualty losses. For casualty losses, you generally can only deduct them now if they happen in a federally declared disaster area.
So much narrower scope for those.
Much narrower, yes, linking them to major events.
Okay, shifting over to the business side of taxation. Full expensing seems like a big deal.
It is, potentially. For tax years, starting after December 31st, 2024, businesses can fully expense, meaning deduct the entire cost immediately for certain types of property and also for domestic R&D expenditures.
Instead of depreciating over time.
Right. It lowers their upfront tax bill significantly, which could spur investment in equipment and innovation.
And the paid family and medical leave credit.
That gets enhanced. Employers can now choose to base the credit on the total insurance premium they pay for a policy covering leave. And the minimum time an employee has to work to qualify is reduced to 6 months.
Making it easier for businesses to offer paid leave and get the credit.
That seems to be the goal, yeah. Potentially expanding access.
And I saw mentions of advanced manufacturing and spaceports.
Yes, the Advanced Manufacturing Investment Credit is enhanced, again trying to boost domestic production. And spaceports, this is interesting, they'll now be treated like airports when it comes to issuing tax-exempt facility bonds.
Meaning cheaper financing for spaceport development?
Essentially, yes. It gives them access to a lower-cost way to borrow money for building infrastructure, similar to how airports or other public projects are often funded. Could be a boost for commercial space.
Okay. International tax, this always sounds complicated. Changes to foreign tax credits.
It is complex, but the bottom line for multinational companies is pretty important. Things like a 90% gross up for some foreign tax credits and disallowing 10% of the credit for certain previously taxed income. Basically, it makes it a bit harder for U.S. companies to use taxes paid overseas to lower their U.S. tax bill.
Might make them rethink global structures.
Could do, yeah, or how they bring profits back home. There are also new rules targeting foreign-controlled United States shareholders, more tightening on international structures.
And for small businesses. Something about qualified small business stock.
Yes, making it more attractive to invest in startups. The holding period to get tax-free gains is shortened from 5 years down to 3. And the amount of gain you can exclude from tax is increased from $10 million up to $15 million for stock bought after a certain date.
Quicker, bigger tax benefits for investing in small biz.
Right, hoping to free up capital for new ventures. And lastly on this, opportunity zones. Those investment zones in distressed communities, they get increased reporting rules and higher penalties for noncompliance.
More oversight.
Seems so. There's even $15 million specifically for the IRS to collect and publish data on how these investments are actually performing. Are they creating jobs, reducing poverty? More transparency and accountability is the goal there.
Okay. Now, moving quickly through banking and housing, a cap on funding for the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection.
Yes, the BCFP's funding will now be capped. This could limit their resources for oversight and enforcement in the consumer finance space, which might impact consumer protection down the line.
And a cut to a housing program?
Right. The act rescinds funding that was previously set aside for the Green and Resilient Retrofit program. That program helped upgrade multifamily housing to be more energy efficient and climate resilient. So less federal money for that now.
It really is striking how widely these economic changes reach. Individual savings, corporate taxes, international operations, consumer protection, housing.
It's incredibly broad. You see a mix of targeted incentives, like for manufacturing or small business, attempts to boost compliance and revenue, and shifts in regulatory focus. Each piece contributes to a larger picture of, well, reoriented economic priorities.
Okay, let's move to our third major area, national security, infrastructure, and how the government itself operates. Defense spending, I saw some specifics aimed at military quality of life.
Yes, some targeted funding there. Things like $62 million to improve staffing at military child care centers, $100 million for the Defense Community Infrastructure Program that helps communities near bases, and another $100 million for DARPA, specifically for research into casualty care.
So investments in personnel and families.
Exactly. Addressing needs that impact readiness and morale.
But there's also massive spending on the hardware side, right? Industrial base, readiness.
Oh, absolutely. Billions and billions earmarked for major weapon systems.
Yeah.
We're talking various types of missile crews, anti-ship, anti-ballistic hypersonic programs, aircraft carriers, submarines, defenses against drones. It's a huge investment.
And support for the companies that build these.
Yes. $3.3 billion specifically allocated for grants through the Industrial Base Fund. It's clearly focused on boosting military capability and the domestic companies that supply it.
And space.
Significant funding there, too. About $3.65 billion from military satellite development and procurement, plus $1 billion for the X-37B spaceplane program. A clear focus on maintaining an edge in space.
Okay, shifting focus to the border. Homeland Security gets a lot of funding for physical barriers.
Yes, billions allocated for various types of border barriers, primary walls, barriers in water areas, secondary fencing, plus access roads and detection tech.
And personnel.
Billions for CBP personnel, patrols, facilities too. But interestingly, there's a restriction they can't use funds to hire processing coordinators after October 31st, 2028.
A shift away from that specific role.
Seems like it. And there's also a new fund, the Bridging Immigration-Related Deficits Experience Nationwide Reimbursement Fund, or Biden Reimbursement Fund. It gets $1.5 billion to help state and local governments cover costs they say are related to undocumented immigration and associated crime.
An attempt to offset local costs.
That's the idea, yes.
Now, judiciary and immigration fees. New fees being added or increased.
Yes, quite a few. For the first time, a $100 fee to apply for asylum. Fees for work permits, employment authorization documents go up to $250. Immigration parole requests, $250. Increases for special immigrant juvenile petitions, adjustment of status applications.
And these will go up over time.
Yes, they're indexed for inflation annually. There are some exemptions, but generally, this could make legal immigration pathways more expensive, potentially creating barriers, especially for lower-income applicants.
And more funding for enforcement.
Definitely. Money flowing to agencies like ICE, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers, the DOJ specifically for investigating and prosecuting immigration offenses, gang crimes involving non-citizens, even unlawful voting by non-citizens, and child trafficking.
A strong emphasis on enforcement within the system.
Clearly. And even the judicial branch gets funding for continuing education, including training on legal claims against the federal government, so preparing for more legal challenges.
So connecting the dots here. A very clear, large investment in national security, border enforcement hardware and personnel, coupled with measures trying to streamline government or increase accountability.
That sums it up well. It's defense, security, administrative tightening, new ways to fund local costs related to immigration, and making the immigration process itself more costly.
All right, let's turn to our fourth section, environmental and energy policy. This seems like an area with some really dramatic shifts. A rollback of green initiatives seems pretty clear.
Yes, very clear. The act outright repeals the greenhouse gas reduction fund. That was a major bucket of money intended for broad emissions cuts.
Right.
Gone. Yeah. And funding is also rescinded, taken back for programs supporting clean heavy-duty vehicles and reducing diesel emissions.
So pulling back federal support for those specific climate programs?
Directly, yes.
Yeah.
A definite change in direction away from those specific green investments.
And several clean energy tax credits are being terminated?
Yes, quite a list here with end dates. The credit for buying commercial clean vehicles ends September 30th, 2025. The credit for installing alternative fuel vehicle refueling property, like EV chargers, ends June 30th, 2026. The tax credit for energy-efficient home improvements ends December 31st, 2025. The deduction for energy-efficient commercial buildings ends June 30th, 2026. The tax credit for builders of new energy-efficient homes also ends June 30th, 2026. And accelerated depreciation or cost recovery for energy property also terminates.
Wow, that's a lot of incentives being phased out relatively quickly.
It is. It removes a significant financial nudge for consumers and businesses to adopt those cleaner technologies. Could definitely slow things down.
And even for the credits that remain, there are new restrictions. These prohibited foreign entity rules sound complicated.
They are, and potentially very impactful for wind and solar projects. Basically, the big credits, the production tax credit and the investment tax credit for clean electricity, won't be available if the project uses material assistance from a prohibited foreign entity.
And that means
it's broadly defined, but clearly targets certain Chinese companies and entities considered under foreign control or influence. There are detailed rules about what effective control means.
So, trying to onshore supply chains for clean energy, reduce reliance on China?
That's clearly the intent. Bolster domestic manufacturing, enhance supply chain security, but it adds a significant layer of complexity and potential risk for developers who need to source components globally.
And another restriction on leasing.
Yes, if a wind or solar facility is primarily rented or leased out to someone else, it can't get these clean electricity credits. That hits some common financing models in the renewables industry, potentially making projects harder to finance.
Okay, so rollbacks and restrictions on green energy. On the other side, promotion of fossil fuels seems pretty explicit.
Very explicit. The Act mandates extensive new oil and gas lease sales, both onshore and offshore. That includes specific directives for areas like the coastal plain of Alaska, ANWR, and the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska.
Mandated leasing.
Yes. And the Secretary of the Interior is also ordered to make at least 4 million additional acres of federal land available for coal leasing.
What coal leasing?
And on top of that, the royalty that companies had to pay on methane extracted during oil and gas operations, that's repealed. So it reduces costs for natural gas producers.
So multiple levers being pulled to encourage fossil fuel production.
Absolutely. It's a clear prioritization of developing traditional energy resources on federal lands and waters.
But then there's this directive about artificial intelligence and national labs.
Yes, it's an interesting counterpoint. The Secretary of Energy is directed to get the national labs working with private industry on transformational AI models.
For what purpose?
Specifically aimed at designing next-gen microelectronics and speeding up innovation in new energy technologies. And these AI models are supposed to be shared through something called the American Science Cloud.
So while boosting fossil fuels now, also investing heavily in future tech.
It raises that exact question about the overall strategy, doesn't it? It seems to be doing both maximizing current resources while also pushing the envelope on potentially disruptive future technologies like AI for energy and advanced computing. It suggests a complex strategy balancing immediate production with long-term tech leadership.
A multi-pronged approach with potential big impacts down the road, both here and globally.
Definitely. The implications for energy markets, technology competition, is something to watch.
Okay, final section. Let's cover agriculture, land use, and some miscellaneous items tucked into this bill. Farm supports seem to be getting a boost.
Yes, several measures aimed at supporting farmers. The Act allows for up to 30 million additional base acres to be allocated to eligible farms. Base acres are linked to eligibility for certain farm program payments, so this could expand support.
More potential payments for more farmers?
Potentially, yes. And loan limits for producers are increased to $155,000, and that limit will be adjusted for inflation each year, so more access to operating capital.
And specific commodity programs. Cotton, sugar.
Updates there too. Changes to cotton storage payments, tweaks to sugar program loan rates, and how import quotas are managed, fine-tuning those existing supports. And the Dairy Margin Coverage Program, which helps dairy farmers manage risk, is extended all the way through 2031.
Providing longer-term certainty for dairy.
Right. And includes updated ways to calculate production history for newer dairy operations.
What about help for farmers facing disasters? Livestock losses.
Significant changes there. For livestock or farm-raised fish lost due to predators, farmers can now get 100% of the market value back. For losses due to bad weather or disease, it's 75%.
That's a much stronger safety net for those kinds of unavoidable losses.
It really is. And crop insurance gets a boost too, specifically for beginning farmers and ranchers.
How so?
They'll get extra help paying their insurance premiums. An additional 5 percentage points off their premium for the first 2 years, 3 points for year 3, 1 point for year 4.
Making it cheaper for new farmers to get started and manage risk.
Exactly. Trying to encourage that next generation. And finally, there's dedicated funding for animal disease prevention, $233 million per year from 2026 through 2030. A solid commitment to protecting animal agriculture.
Okay. Public lands, more timber sales?
Yes. The Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management are required to increase the amount of timber they sell annually from public lands. A clear directive for more logging.
And just to recap, new fees for renewables on public land.
Right. We touched on that. New acreage rent and capacity fees for wind, solar, etc. on public lands, with a share of that revenue going back to the states and counties where the projects are located.
Okay. And now for some of the other provisions. Ending unemployment for very high earners.
Yes. The Act stops unemployment benefit payments for anyone whose wages in their base period were over $1 million.
Focusing unemployment aid away from the highest earners.
That appears to be the logic, yes.
And something called the Garden of Heroes.
Yeah, it authorizes the creation of a Garden of Heroes. It's an example of how these massive bills can include very specific non-budgetary items alongside the huge policy changes.
Also, enforcement on COVID-related employee retention credits.
Yes, provisions to presumably track down and claw back any fraudulent claims related to that pandemic-era program.
And finally, just to reiterate, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA changes.
Right, a significant expansion there. Broadening who is eligible to receive compensation for health issues linked to Cold War-era atomic testing or uranium mining, and also increasing the payment amounts. A really important update for those affected communities.
So what does this all mean? I mean, we've covered so much ground. It's just a staggering amount of change packed into one piece of legislation.
It really is. It demonstrates just how far-reaching these acts can be, touching virtually every sector, every community in some way.
From SNAP benefits and grad school loans to border walls, energy policy, and even how timber is harvested. It's incredibly multifaceted. Hopefully, breaking it down like this gives you, the listener, a better grasp of the key pieces.
A foundational understanding, at least, of what's in this incredibly complex law.
So as you think about all these changes we've discussed, the shifts in social support, the economic incentives, the security focus, the energy direction, maybe take a moment. How might such a comprehensive act shape daily life for different people, different industries, in ways both intended, maybe unexpected? What part of this massive bill stands out to you as having the biggest ripple effect down the road?